We're only 2 weeks away from the start of the NFL season, which means we are at peak drafting season over these next few weekends. So today we're going to be discussing some of my favorite late round quarterbacks and tight ends that you should be looking to target in your upcoming fantasy draft. So let's go ahead and get into it. First, I just want to talk about when it comes to quarterbacks, especially a late round quarterback approach versus drafting early round quarterback. Now, the biggest thing that you have to take into consideration here really is simply opportunity cost. What are you foregoing by taking a Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson in your second or third round of your fantasy drafts? I think it really does matter because you're talking about foregoing players in those ranges like a Drake London, like an Amarian Hampton, like Nico Collins, AJ Brown, George Pickens, Malik Neighbors, Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, that are all going in that range. Similar, you can talk about with Lamar Jackson, where you have Jalen Waddle, Rasheed Rice, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers. They're all going in that range as well. I just think the opportunity cost of the players you're foregoing to be able to get one of those players, it's just not worth the squeeze. And really, if you look at it last year, the difference between the QB1 and QB12 was only 4 fantasy points per game. But the difference between the RB1 and the RB12, and the same as the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 12, were nearly 10 fantasy points per game. There is such little difference between the number 1 quarterback and the number 12 quarterback in fantasy football that it just doesn't make sense, in my opinion, to forego the opportunity to be able to get a player in those ranges that still offer elite upside. And so for me, I would much rather go with a later round quarterback approach. And also, I think flexibility also matters because if you go late round quarterback, you can pair multiple quarterbacks together and just simply play matchups, stream one of those positions on a weekly basis. That being said, we're going to talk about some of my favorite late round quarterbacks that you should be looking to target. And first, we're going to talk about it's going to be Brock Purdy, QB12 or 108th overall. Purdy missed 8 games last year due to a left AC joint sprain as well as a turf toe injury. Now, over his final 7 games, he absolutely balled out when he returned in week 11. He completed 70% of his passes. He averaged 230 passing yards per game. So we'll go along with nearly 20 rushing yards per game. Now, overall, he finishes the QB2 over that span, averaging 24 fantasy points per game, only behind Trevor Lawrence. And he also did this with a ton of injuries last year. So this 49ers team, he was without Ricky Pearsall, Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings, and George Kittle all missed time last year. Purdy was completing passes to 30-year-old Kendrick Bourne, 31-year-old Demarcus Robinson, as well as backup tight end Jake Tonjes last year. Despite that, he still produced at an elite level. Now, the last 3 years, he's never finished outside of the top 12, top 5 numbers in 2 of those 3 seasons as well. Now, heading into 2026, this is still very much an AARP club in terms of his offensive talent that is going around him. Mike Evans obviously was brought in over this offseason. Deebo Samuel they brought in. George Kittle is 33 years old. And they also have Deshaun Stribling, who they spent a second-round pick on, who is skyrocketing up draft boards right now. Either way, we've seen him last year be able to produce without elite level around him. This offensive ecosystem with Kyle Shanahan just consistently produces top-end numbers for Brock Purdy, but he's never drafted very high. But he produces like a top 5 to 10 quarterback every year. He also may not have a huge ceiling as a runner, but he provides just enough to be able to raise his weekly floor as well. So Purdy is the first quarterback that I'm looking to target. Next up, let's talk about one of the players that I think has been widely discussed this offseason. I feel like most people are down on him, and that's indicative of his ADP, and that is Patrick Mahomes. Never in a world did I think we would be seeing him go at quarterback 15th or the 11th round. Mahomes last year finished the QB2, averaging 21 fantasy points per game on the season in 2025 before tearing his ACL and LCL in December. Now, despite the timeline of the injury, he is on track to be ready to go for week 1. Now, I would anticipate he's probably going to run a little bit less than he did last year. Last year, he set career highs in rushing yards and touchdowns. That's never been a huge part of his fantasy appeal. Throughout his career, he's averaged basically 319 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns per season, or 2.5 fantasy points per game of his total production on the season. Now, like I said, I don't think he's going to run as much as he did in years past, especially to start the year. But I think as the year goes by, you probably see him get more and more comfortable, and he probably looks to run a little bit more. Now, again, he's never been Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen in terms of a runner. He's always been much more of a smart runner and picks and chooses when he's going to run. And I do think as the season goes by, you're probably going to see a little bit. So it's not like that's going to go completely out of the window in terms of his rushing upside. Now, where I think the biggest upgrade they make this offseason has been finally fixing this running game, bringing in Kenneth Walker, drafting Emmett Johnson, I think are going to do wonders for this passing offense because we have just seen it over the last 3 years where defenses just do not care about their running game. They do not stack the boxes against them. Last year, the Chiefs faced the least amount of stacked boxes, and it didn't matter because they couldn't run the ball. And so teams were just allowed to just sit back and sit on their passing game, and really they couldn't use play action. They finished last in play action rate last year because it just didn't make sense to use it because nobody was fooled by it. And so I think adding a run game this year is going to really help elevate this offense. And this running game can be as effective as I think that it can be. That I think it's actually going to help Patrick Mahomes. And honestly, if Patrick Mahomes doesn't necessarily hit the ground running, I think it's still fine because you're drafting him at QB 15. The upside is already taken out of it, but this guy still has the potential to finish as a top 5, top 6 fantasy quarterback this year, and you're able to get him at QB 15. Remember, Patrick Mahomes has never finished outside of the top 12 as a fantasy quarterback once in his entire career. Next up, let's move over to Jared Goff. He is the QB 16 or the 11th round. Everyone drafting Joe Burrow in round 5 right now, but you can get similar production from Jared Goff 6 rounds later. Now, he finishes the QB 13 in fantasy points per game last year with 4,500 passing yards and 34 touchdowns. Over the past 3 years, Goff has thrown for 4,500 yards and over 30 touchdowns in all 3 of those years. Lions also have the easiest schedule and play 13 games inside a dome this year. As far as Goff is concerned, the Lions have the 4th easiest fantasy schedule and will close out the season with matchups against the Giants, Vikings, and Bears. While Goff offers absolutely nothing on the ground, he is one of the best pure pocket passers in the league. And then you take it into context with all the weapons they have with Amon-Ra, J-Mo, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs in the passing game. There is a lot to like with Jared Goff this year. I think that he is going to finish as a top 12 quarterback. And I also think there's a path where he could finish like a Matthew Stafford 2025 top season and with 4,500 passing yards and 40 plus touchdowns. So if you miss out on a quarterback in the top 10 rounds, waiting on Goff is a great fallback option. Lastly, let's talk about Tyler Shough, quarterback 22, 158th overall. Now, Shough was drafted the 2nd round of the NFL draft last year. Spencer Rattler started the year as the QB1, but they eventually turned to Tyler Shough. And once they did over the second half of the season, while he did start a little slow over the first couple of weeks, he found a rhythm and had a really strong finish to the season. From weeks 10 through 18, he was the QB9, averaging 19 fantasy points per game. He also had the 3rd highest completion percentage, the 10th highest yards per attempt, as well as the 10th most rushing yards, the 4th most rushing touchdowns. Shough excelled with head coach Kellen Moore, who implements a very fantasy-friendly offense because this is a team that wants to run as many plays as possible. Last year, they were 11th in total plays. They are one of the most fast-paced offenses this year, and I expect them to easily finish inside the top 5 in that number this year. And obviously, that is just a good offensive, that is a good ecosystem to be in as a fantasy quarterback. So I think Tyler Shough is in a very good spot. And also, they really went out and really upgraded this offense over the offseason. Now, Jordan Tyson, who they selected in the 1st round, is going to miss the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season. So that is obviously a little bit of a blow. But still, they also drafted Bryce Lance in the 4th round. Now, Bryce Lance has actually been getting a lot of buzz recently and how well he's looked as much more of a deep threat for this offense. But they also went out and signed Travis Etienne. As well as fortifying this offensive line with left guard David Edwards, who ranked 12th last year among all guards. So Shough right now is essentially free and worthy of a late round selection, a player you can easily pair with a Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, or Jared Goff. Now, move over to tight ends. Now, if I had the opportunity to select one of the top 5 tight ends, I have no problem taking that shot. Brock Bowers, I think, could have a monster season. Trey McBride should also have a very good season with Jacoby Brissett. And then also, Colson Loveland, there's a lot to like with his ceiling this year. I think he could absolutely smash. And then Tyler Warren, if you wanted to go early round tight end. But if I can't get my hands on one of those players, I am waiting a little bit later in the draft to be able to get my tight end. And the first tight end I want to discuss today is going to be Dalton Kincaid, tight end 11. Now, Kincaid, the last 2 years have been plagued with knee issues, mainly a PCL. And that PCL injury has started to become a much bigger issue in the NFL. We're starting to see that pop up more and more. Ricky Pearsall last year dealt with that and then is going to miss the entire year this year because of that issue. Kyle Pitts dealt with that a few years ago. We finally saw him last year finally overcome that. Now this year, Dalton Kincaid, by all reports, that is behind him and that his knees is feeling much better. Because in 2024, he played in just 12 games. In 2025, he played in 13 games, mainly because of this PCL issue. He was also limited, only ran 51% of the routes last year, but he did average 10.5 fantasy points per game. However, when he was on the field, he has been one of the best tight ends on per route basis. He ranked 1st in yards per route run, 1st in first downs per route run, as well as 1st in yards per reception and 7th in yards per team pass attempt. Heading into 2026, he has looked incredible so far in camp, and he has the talent to be a top 5 tight end this year, especially if we see this route participation go up from the 50% range up to 70, 80%. It is absolutely wheels up for Dalton Kincaid. I think he has all the talent in the world. This is not a loaded wide receiver room or a loaded target room here within this offense. Obviously, they brought in DJ Moore, but then after that, it's Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman. I don't even know if he's going to make the team at this point. But so there's a lot to like here with Dalton Kincaid. And again, upside is absolutely immense. Next up, let's move over to Dallas Goedert, tight end 12 or the 10th round. Goedert finished 2025 as the tight end 6, averaging 12.6 PPR points per game. Now, most of his production came from scoring touchdowns. Now, nearly 40% of his total production came from those touchdowns. He also ran a route on 81% of dropbacks with the fourth highest rate among all tight ends. Now, in 2026, his offense is going to look different. Now, they brought in offensive coordinator Sean Mannion, which I think is going to do wonders for this offense. And then A.J. Brown being traded frees up about 120 targets. Now, this offseason, they did bring in some other players, Makai Lemon in the first round. They also drafted Eli Stowers, and then Dontavian Wicks they brought in as well. Who some of these guys are figured to soak up some of this target share that is going to be left over from A.J. Brown. But it's certainly not crazy to think that Goedert could reach 100 targets this year. It could be the number 2 option in this offense. We already know that they love looking for him inside the red zone. I think he can finish as a right around a top 5 tight end this year if everything goes right for him. And he's currently being drafted at the tight end 12. So lastly, I want to hit on is going to be Juwan Johnson, tight end 18. With Jordan Tyson going down, we should see Juwan Johnson slide up in the pecking order as a number 2 target in this offense behind Chris Olave. Last year, we had a breakout year from Juwan Johnson, averaging 10.6 fantasy points per game, or the tight end 11. He set career high in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. He ranked 3rd in first read target share among all tight ends as well. Johnson was also solid on a per route basis. He finished 11th in yards per route run, 10th in yards per reception, and 9th in yards per pass attempt. The Saints should have one of the most fast-paced offenses this year. Johnson is currently being drafted at tight end 17 or the 13th round. And he, once again, has a really good chance to finish as a top 12 tight end this year. Now, I want to hit on a couple later round guys really quickly. The first one's going to be Terrence Ferguson. Now, he was drafted last year. He actually led all tight ends in deep targets, but there's been a ton of buzz out of camp for Terrence Ferguson and that he could easily be the number 3 in the pecking order of targets in the offense. Obviously, Puka Nacua is going to get his, but you have Devontae Adams, who is aging, and there's been some speculation that they could utilize him a little bit less and utilize him a little bit more sparingly. And someone like Terrence Ferguson could really benefit because Terrence Ferguson is a very good pass-catching tight end. He's not much of a blocking tight end. Now, I will say this room is still really crowded with tight ends, with Tyler Higbee, Colby Parkinson, Davis Allen, and then they use a 2nd-round pick this year on Max Clare. So I think that's going to give a lot of people pause. But I do think that there is a definite ceiling here for him to finish as a top 15 or even a top 12 tight end if they do utilize him a lot more than what they did last season. So I think there's a ton of upside here. But again, not somebody I think you need to run out and absolutely have on your rosters. Next up is going to be Greg Dulcich. Dulcich made quite the impact last year, but it was a very small sample size in 10 games. He delivered 12.9 yards per reception and a 2.31 yards per route run, which rank inside the top 10 among tight ends. In 10 games last year, what wasn't a huge year, 26 catches, 335 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown. Right now, what's the like about Greg Dulcich is very little in his path in terms of being able to command a lot of targets. You have Malik Washington, Caleb Douglas, Chris Bell, Tutu Atwell. Like, there's just not a lot here that is just going to absolutely demand targets in front of him. Now, the big question with Greg Dulcich is, can he stay healthy? Because that's been something that has kind of derailed his career, is the fact that he gets hurt almost every single year. So if he's able to stay healthy, I think there's a lot to like here, and he easily could lead this team in targets. Now, so that being said, let me know in the comments section below who are some of your favorite late round targets at both quarterback and tight end. And if you have any questions for your upcoming fantasy drafts, be sure to leave in the comments section below. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.